Great. So this is working. I like that, powered by QMS. That's kind of fun. It's really powered by QIM, so it's kind of the play on words. So we're here today to talk about Tenneco's new QIM implementation. So this is really a kind of a neat thing, and you guys are in store for a special treat because I got James Farmer here with me, who did a lot of the work. Really subject matter expert now on QIM, works for Tenneco. And we're not only going to bore you with some slides, but we're also going to show you the system, okay? Show you what it actually looks like and how it works, et cetera. So we'll start with a little overview on who Tenneco is, who QMS is. We'll talk about their MRR processes and kind of where they were at, with their supplier complaint process and what they wanted to do to enhance it. We'll then talk about where they wanted to go and how QIM was a fit. And we'll talk about some of the solution highlights that they did that are really quite neat. It wasn't just a baseline kind of vanilla out-of-the-box implementation. We really wanted to deliver something to the business that would add value, okay? So in a new product, that was a little challenging, and we had some challenges with that, but I think, as you'll see, the hard work was well worth it. So, and we're going to do the demo, which is a lot of fun. So a little bit about Tenneco. So does anybody know who Tenneco is besides Rick, who works for Tenneco? So Tenneco is an automotive parts manufacturer. They manufacture exhaust systems as well as shocks and struts. Okay, they supply to a lot of the OEs, Fords, Chryslers, GMs, etc. But they also have an aftermarket division. So they are publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange, symbol 10, and they are a very large global company, 7.4 billion in sales last year, and headquartered just up the road in Lake Forest. So just up 294, you'll find them up in Lake Forest. So they have 25,000 employees worldwide, and they not only just manufacture the products, they also design and engineer and help to continue to enhance the different markets that they serve. So talked about their customer base, but you'll find them near a lot of the automotive manufacturers. So in the Michigan area, overseas, close to usually where the larger plants are that assemble the stuff for BMW, Fiat, Toyota, Honda, Nissan, GM, Ford, etc. So they also have an aftermarket division that services the aftermarket retailers that we have in the U.S. and globally, so like Napa, Pep Boys, etc. So you wouldn't know their parts. Obviously, you buy a Ford or GM car and you get an exhaust system and you're happy with it. But if you want to enhance that or you need to fix it, you might know their aftermarket brands. Monroe Shocks and Struts, Walker Mufflers, okay, are some of their aftermarket brand names. So they have a large aftermarket division as well. So a little bit about QMS. We are basically a niche services provider specializing in manufacturing and quality. We've been a large supporter of this event over the last 4 or 5 years now. We really like it because this is what we do. We go to Sapphire in the spring, and I always say, it's a fun event, but it's large. It's 16,000 people, and you may start talking to somebody that does HR or finance. These events are really kind of geared towards what we do because, if you walk up to somebody and talk manufacturing, more than likely than not at this event, they're going to know manufacturing. So we have basically a deep industry experience. Usually most of our customers are, can be in discrete industries, but a lot of times we're in the pharma, chemical, food industries, a lot of times where the FDA stringent requirements are. We have a very nice relationship with Germany, and this QIM product we've been a part of for the past 5 years. We started on the Influence Council, and we'll talk through that and our relationship, how we've actually built the product, but basically functioning in the customer validations and the ramp-up program, which is basically what Tenneco just went through. So let's talk about kind of where we started on this MRR process. Really what was happening at Tenneco at the time was we were basically launching a global QM pilot project that had about 16 different processes. Okay, everything from receiving inspection to outbound shipments, calibrations, etc. We were really going the full gamut with test equipment integration, and we were piloting several plants. Part of those processes also were our non-conformance processes, customer complaints, internal problems, audit findings, and most importantly, supplier complaints. So they had a system in place, when we started called the MRR system. MRR stands for Material Rejection Report. So Tenneco, as an automotive parts manufacturer, doesn't do a lot of incoming inspection until they find a problem. When they find a problem, they create an MRR to document the problem. They notify the supplier. They go through processes that, is containment required? Do we want to charge the vendor? Is sorting activities needed, et cetera, to get rid of this problem? So they track that in the MRR system, and then they also generate sometimes debit memos against the suppliers based upon the amount of work that they had to do to correct the problem. So they had a Lotus Notes application, basically, 2 Lotus Notes databases that were sort of linked together, okay, that would allow them to create the issue, and it would allow them to actually create a debit memo against that. And they would then track the different, basically, entries in the Lotus Notes database, through statuses, et cetera. So they had a lot of pain points with this that they really wanted to address. While they were doing this in the Lotus Notes database and have a variety of supplier complaints, they had no interaction with their suppliers besides verbal communication. Conversely, over on the other side of the fence, they were using enterprise portals and SRM to basically have some collaboration with suppliers, and they build a custom application for their PPAP approval process. Okay, so they knew that, hey, we would like to get the MRR system into the portal and have the suppliers basically be able to interact with us and do some of the work and fill out some of the information themselves. Also, you hear about pain points. A lot of these complaint systems will be standalone in a web-based system or whatever, but they don't have a list of all the SAP materials or suppliers, et cetera. So this Lotus Notes database was no different. Sometimes they'd go in to create a complaint for a new part. It wasn't in there. So they had several, basically, problems with this database, with it getting updated on time, et cetera. They also had multiple sites, multiple instances of SAP that were running. So they're trying to update this Lotus Notes database from SAP instances in North America and Europe and non-SAP instances. So, and the debit memo piece, while they had a Lotus Notes database to track it, when it came time to create it, it was a manual process. And it went through several different groups to get created, and they said, why can't we automate this? Why can't we do something better? So hence the eMRR project was born. It was, basically envisioned that, hey, let's do that. Gary's laughing, our illustrious project manager, that without him we would not have gotten through this project, so I want to recognize Mr. Davis there. But so I think it was about a year and a half ago, in January or so, we were doing some of the QM readouts and validating the stuff with the business, and our business owner, Wayne Karcher, came up and said, hey, we want to create an eMRR system. We want to basically do exactly like we did with the PPAP, and we want you to create a custom web DIMPRO application for us that'll handle supplier complaints. Okay, we can do that. Said, well, we are implementing supplier complaints in SAP as part of the global template. He said, well, it's not web-based. We want it to be web-based, so we want supplier interaction. I said, okay, so, all right, we can talk about that, He said, it needs to be global. It needs to, complement the QM project. So we didn't want to go off and create something separate. We wanted to create something that would be complementary, but they wanted it web-based. They wanted it in enterprise portals, and they wanted that vendor collaboration. They really wanted to address some of these pain points, which we couldn't do or didn't want to do, in standard SAP quality management in the ECC instance. So we created a project to address the eMRR. We wanted to address and improve the pain points in the current MRR database. We wanted to make sure suppliers were there, materials were there. We didn't really want to have 2 sources of the truth. We wanted one source of the truth, which was SAP. We wanted to reference that information from the different instances of SAP. We wanted that data to be validated, to make sure that it was correct. Before we'd have to do additional checks, but they wanted that data to be validated to ensure they had the right part number. They wanted to remove the manual effort needed to create debit memos. They said this is non-value added activities, automate it. They also wanted one global system. Okay, they have, as I talked about just a minute ago, they have 2 production instances of SAP, one in North America and really one in the rest of the world, not just Europe. Latin America is on it as well. So they wanted one common system that they could capture supplier complaints, one common process that would work for everyone. So, and the big deal that they really go after is this parts per million calculation. It is a big deal. In fact, I was talking with Scott Reedy, who's the director, last night, and we're trying to look for ways to basically accelerate some of the global QM implementation around receiving inspection to start capturing this alongside the new QIM product. Because parts per million is a big deal, that calculation when they're dealing with their suppliers and managing defects. So it needed to be able to do this. So making a decision on where we went wasn't not easy, you know. Like I said, we started this a year and a half ago, and we were in talks and stuff, and we were basically had written a statement of work. QMS had provided a statement of work to have custom development done with WebDimPro, and we basically had that statement of work signed, and we're starting to ramp up the program. At the same time that was happening, I was participating in the customer validation projects. So I was implementing basically the first QIM system at one of our customers, one of our healthcare customers, right up here in Chicago. We had 2 other implementations happening as well, and we were learning more about this product that we helped design. As I said before, we were part of the Influence Council that provided requirements and gave direction to Germany to develop. So, but we weren't sure, you know, and do you stick your neck out and say, hey, here's a new product, you know? Well, through the customer validation program, we were able to get a sneak peek, and yeah, stuck my neck out and I said, hey guys, you may want to consider this. I know it's bad timing. I know we've been struggling to get the statement of work written, but I don't want you coming back a little bit later and saying, hey, why didn't you tell us about QIM? Why didn't we leverage this? Okay, so they looked at QIM and said, hey, it's not going to be as custom as we want it, but it's a nice standardized supported solution, and we think it'll work. Okay, that's kind of how the project was born. Then there were several iterations of going through with Mr. Omer here to get the licensing agreement done, et cetera, but we got it started, and now James is really going to run you through kind of what we've done with it and where we've taken it, and pretty proud of what we've done. So James?
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. One thing just to kind of talk on that point, one thing that was really cool about the QIM application was 80%, after having a demo, we determined about 80% of the functionality that QIM actually had met our requirements right out of the box, which was pretty cool for a brand new application that SAP was delivering. So really, it was kind of a no-brainer once we saw both the applications, let's go with a standardized solution that's going to benefit Tenneco in the long run when it comes to upgrading and not having to deal with all this custom code. So the solution itself was actually really, I would say, pretty easy to actually implement once we started going. We were able to use one issue type to handle both North America and Europe, all in one box. What was actually also really cool was all the master data was handled in both of those systems. So we didn't have to have any duplicate data between North America, Europe. It was all standardized, all coming from one core source. We are also able to use specific field implementations, so we could customize the fields, the data that we needed to do, and put it in the application itself. And it was actually through configuration. So it was really easy to implement any type of fields or any technical specific stuff without actually having to go and develop it. We also were able to implement different reference objects. So one of the things that Tenneco uses is scheduling agreements a lot in SAP. And we were able to implement a reference object for scheduling agreement to pull in scheduling agreement data into the QIM system. Along with that, there was also standard reference object that it delivered, which was purchase orders, vendor, material information. So all that came out of the box right off the fact. So it was really easy to just look at that, kind of copy it, and bring in scheduling agreement data that we were using. We were also able to implement a duplicate check system. So one of the issues that we had with our old application was when there was an issue with a vendor, it actually impacted multiple plants. So multiple plants would go ahead and start creating issues. So you'd have 3 or 4 issues out there all at the same time. This solution, we were actually able to implement a button where going through this process, you would click on this button once you entered in your material, vendor, and defect information. It would automatically look to see if there was any issues with that combination in the last 60 days. And if it was, it'd give you a message saying, hey, there's a duplicate out here. You might want to follow up with this before actually creating an issue. Another really cool thing that the solution delivered was business partner functionality. So we're actually able to, when you go through an issue, you would assign different people responsible for that issue. And we were actually able to leverage the SAP solution to bring in business partners from our SRM system into the QIM system automatically, and then also put in logic where you would automatically determine what the business partner is. So you wouldn't even have to search for the vendor if you had all the right data listed up right up front. And then we also used SAP BRF Plus functionality to drive decision trees. So we would have a question, say, is this a quality or a delivery issue? And based on the answer to that question, it would then kick off another activity saying, okay, it's a quality issue. What are some other, here's some more additional questions we want to know. You know, is the containment plan set at the Tenneco location? Is there a containment plan at the vendor location? And so you actually are answering these questions, and it's kind of like a dynamic tree. As you're answering them, different questions appear. So it's a really good way to process flow out the process. Relatively easy. Just a couple of examples where I was talking about custom teal. So this is just a screenshot where we actually had our reference object we determined was going to be our reference system, which is what ERP system are you in, and then what material. And based on that information, inputting in that screen, you'd have automatic data being populated into the system. We also, like I said before, you're able to configure this. So actually what's really cool about this is you would go on the screen and you say, hey, I want to have a field right under type of issue. You'd right-click on the screen, click on a configuration component button that would appear, and then the screen layout appears right in front of you. So then you actually would search for your field, find it, pull it in, put how long do you want the field to look. Really flexible, really easy to do. And then the second screen there is just kind of showing you, right, we had 3 options that we would choose. You would either choose, I'm in North America reference system, I'm in our European reference system, or we're not on SAP still, so we're going to choose what we call local QIM, which would then just say, okay, we're just going to stay in this QIM system. There's going to be no validations going out to a reference system to validate that the material exists because they're not on SAP yet. And QIM actually has the capabilities to connecting to other non-SAP applications. We just determined not to do that in this case because we're almost close to rolling everything out on SAP. Here's where I kind of talked about the reference object section. So you would actually say, okay, I am looking up I had a delivery that was bad. It had some bad, bad product on it. I want to go find that delivery that's tied to a purchase order or a scheduling agreement. So I would go in and I would choose purchase order, scheduling agreement. Then I would put in the material. I would put in the plant that I'm from. And when I hit a search, all that combination would appear, and I would be able to find my order, click on it. Once I clicked on it, all the data from that order would populate into the screen. And then also right there is where I was talking about that duplicate check. At that time, that's where we would actually check to see, okay, is there another MRR out there currently in the system before I go any further in the process. This is the business partner screen. So this is actually where you determine who's going to be dealing with this issue. So like I was talking about before, a lot of this we were able to automate using BRF Plus functionality. So like, for example, each of the plants, we have a plant leader, and we'd want them to be notified that there was an issue at their plant. So based on the table in the BRF system, we say, okay, when it's this plant selected, it's going to be this business partner, this plant manager. We also had functionality where I was talking about before, where based on the vendor number that we selected, it would go into the system and look in the business partner and would look for that vendor number, and would find that vendor number. It would grab the business partner and automatically put it into as a business partner for you. So you wouldn't have to go and search for the vendor contact. And then we also put a check in there to say, okay, well, if it doesn't exist, let the person know, so then they can go follow up to see why does this business partner exist in the system yet. And then also the activities. What was really cool was we were able to say, okay, at the issue level, these are the people that are responsible. And once you actually put those people responsible, it'll automatically transfer to all the activities that that person needs to do. So you don't have to go to each activity and say, this activity is, this person is responsible for this one activity, this other person is responsible for another activity. It would all come from at the issue level. So it was really flexible, not a lot of maintenance at all. And then this is just where I was talking about the BRF functionality, where based on some questions I'm answering, it's going to drive different activities out. So the activities will automatically get driven out. They'll automatically be chosen for you, the people that are responsible for those activities. And then there's also standard workflow. So you could say, okay, well, this activity, I want a workflow to go out to a person to their inbox so they know that they have an activity in the system that they have to log in and do. So that was another big requirement on our end is, it's good to have the data in the system, but if people aren't getting notified that they actually have to go into the system, it's not going to help us out. So the system has workflow at both when we create an issue, notifications will go out to tell people that an eMRR is in the system, and then also when they're responsible for an activity, they'll kick off an email to them as well.
Yeah, this really ends up being some really neat dynamic functionality that you can dynamically determine the route and the process flow that it needs to go through the organization. We had heard about this before, and when we finally got it working, we were like, wow. And you know, we really had to almost sketch it out in Excel, right? And because you know, it took on a life of its own, but this is really one thing we want to show you, because to see it in action is quite neat. Depending on what how the user responds, the system takes a different approach or a different path, and it can notify people automatically. So really neat stuff here.
Yep. And then we mentioned earlier about a debit memo. So one of the things the QIM system does is has what's called a follow-up activity or function. And what it does out of the box is you can actually, from the system, based on data you put in the issue, it can automatically call that SAP system that you're connected to and create a quality notification. So we just said, well, let's use that same functionality and do a real-time debit memo. So instead of having a process where we've got a batch jobs running that's going to create it and it could fail, or we've got IDOCs going back and forth. If they fail, you have to have someone check those IDOCs. We actually have a real-time solution. When they hit that button to create the debit memo, it goes out and attempts to create it. And if it creates it, gives you a message, puts the information in the QIM system for you automatically so you can review it. If there's any type of failure on the QIM side or the SAP side, it'll give you a red error saying, you know, GL account is invalid, please check, or cost center invalid, please check. Whatever that error is, it kicks it back to you so you can review it and say, okay, let me go fix the item and then attempt to process it again.
You know, one thing to point out here too, I wanted just to show the system. One of the things SAP really wanted to accomplish with this was flexibility and user experience, and it is uber flexible, if I can use the word uber. I don't even really know what it means, but it's very, very, very flexible. This cost tab we added ourselves, no development required. It's through configuration, and just like he was talking about before, and we were trying to figure out how to have this cost matrix on there. We had different ideas that we worked through. At the end of the day, we were able to put a cost tab. Not only put a cost tab there, but the cost tab only shows up when they're on the cost activity. So it's very slick and very little programming required. Conversely, if we tried to do that in ECC, we would have had to have a developer that would have took several weeks or whatever to develop. So really quite nice.
Yeah, so I kind of already talked about the debit memo process here, but it's basically, what we did is we had an approval process too with activities, which was kind of cool. So we would have, okay, the information would be inputted in the debit memo cost tab. It would then kick off to somebody that's responsible to review that. Say, okay, let me look at the information, let me make sure it looks good. And then they would say, okay, I approve that debit memo. Then it would get kicked off to a buyer. The buyer would review it because he's responsible for that relationship with the vendor. He'd look at the information. He'd make sure that there's no contractual reason why we can't create a debit memo. He'd say, yep, everything looks good. He would approve it. Then it would actually go to the vendor, and the vendor would actually get in the system and look what he's going to get charged beforehand. Now, at this time, hopefully, they've already been in conversations with Tenneco. They understand that. But if there's any point they have a disagreement, they can then say, well, I'm not going to approve this yet. I want to follow up and really make sure I understand this before we actually get debited. So then it cuts down a lot of rework at the end when we debit somebody and they say, they get mad at Tenneco saying, well, why are you charging me this much? I thought it was going to be only X amount. And then you have to go through and issue a credit memo and go through it. It eliminates all that pain point because they're all up front. Everybody knows what's being charged right up at front. Then once the vendor approves, then it goes back to somebody that's in finance to actually generate the debit memo. And that's what I was talking about before. It's really cool because they'll create the debit memo, but any type of issues that stop it from creating, they should already have a pretty good knowledge set of why that GL, why a GL account isn't in there or why the cost center, so they can go and fix it right away. They don't have to go and find somebody else to go and figure out what the issue is and then get back and send an email. It takes all that out of the loop based on the process we implemented. Reporting too, we actually use Cognos reporting at Tenneco. So what we were able to do is use BI extractors, extract the data out of QIM, send it to a file, and send it to a system called Teradata, where basically it groups it together and then outputs it to Cognos. So all the reporting and everything could still remain the same. It was just extracting the data out of QIM and then implementing it. Also, QIM has some pretty cool, it's called BCV, and Business Context Viewer, I think. And it can take data that you can look at a work list that has all issues out there, and you can start doing, like, you can highlight all of them and say, okay, let me check to see how many issues are out there for this plant. It'll actually create pie charts for you, bar graphs, all the stuff that you normally would have to dump into Excel and do yourself. It automatically has it in there for you, so you don't even have to do that. And then you can save it as reports. You don't have to do any Excel manipulation. Of course, it's there if you want to do it, but a lot of out of the box already meets those requirements for you.
Let's show it to them.
Okay, so yeah, now we'll do a system demo.
You want to drive?
Sure.
I've been drinking.
All right, so one thing we're not showing exactly is we had an enterprise portal. So we would actually, our vendor or technical employee would log into an enterprise portal first, and then there would be an eMRR tab that they would click on that would actually bring them to the screen. So that's how we kind of collaborate with the vendors. They're not actually directly going in, they're not VPN into our system and then get into the system. We actually have a whole portal process that they can go through outside of the network. This screen right here can vary. It's all custom. Or I should say custom, it's all personalized. So you can have different user links, you can have different work lists, you can have your charts showing up right here if you want. You could actually have a link to, like, the Tenneco website appearing right here for you, so you would actually be on the Tenneco website at the same time you're on QIM. On the left side here is kind of your home-based stuff. So I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but some of the key features are your work list. Silence.
Did you hear the joke about that?
All right, there we go.
Here we go. See, this guy got to start telling the joke. It was sleeping.
I don't know if we're connected anymore.
Yeah, we're connected.
Okay.
Is it?
Yeah, it usually
I went through
takes.
my phone earlier and it wasn't bad, but now I guess I should click my phone back up.
Okay, so this is like your work list, and this all can be modified to how you want it to look like. So this is like right out of the box. This isn't very clean, but what's cool is, like I said, you can go over here and say, okay, well, I want to just see my issues that I'm responsible for. So you click on this personalized setting right here. And you've probably seen, I mean, if you're in SAP before, you've seen this when you're looking at variant configuration. But it's kind of the same concept. You can move in fields, move out fields, and then you save your view. And then every time you log in the system, then you're just going right to that view. Cancel out of here. Another thing you can do too, and I'm not going to do it at this point, but you can actually click into the issue right here, and it'll pull it up for you. And that's how actually the solution we have with the vendors, because one of the things we had first implemented this was before we went live, we realized that the vendors could actually see all issues. So not just issues that they're responsible for other areas. So what we had to do is we actually used the Worklist solution to implement the system to look at the business partner that this vendor is assigned to. It would automatically input this into the work list. So when they open up their work list, they're automatically getting defaulted what their issues are. And then we took away the access to change the work list, and therefore they could see just what they're responsible for and what's open for them. And then we actually defaulted that for all the users as well. When the users log in, they're only seeing issues that are open for them. And then they can actually create a work list if they want to look at other issues, or if they want to look at plants that, or look at other plants that are at other MRRs, or other MRRs at plants. So, really flexible. We definitely try to keep it, let the users kind of do what they want to do, but just put some initial framework into what the vendors can see and what the users at Tenneco can see. So the process is when they're going to have an issue that they need to create, they're going to log into the system, and they're going to click on this, what we call the Quality Issue Guided. And the reason why we call it guided is it's kind of like an Amazon, or I don't know if you're familiar with SRM, the shopping cart functionality where you have the steps that go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's kind of the same process here. You log in and say, okay, my first step is I'm going to describe the issue. So you'll go through and you'll fill out all the information. We use the res asterisk to show that what's required and what's not required. One cool feature too is if you notice my name populated right here, that's because the flexibility of every field that you implement, if you right click on it, you have this user settings. You can put use current value as a default. So you can put in your name. You can put in anything that you're going to repeat all the time. Basically, you put in that information. You right-click it, say use this as my default. The next time I log into the system, it's defaulting it for me. So like I had done my name here. Here's just where you can describe the issue. I'll just say issue with.
And James, showing off the flexibility, what if I didn't want to enter in the issue text? It wasn't relevant to me. How would I get rid of it? Would I call my programmer?
No, you don't have to call your programmer. It's the same process. You right-click on the field. You say hide field. Field goes away. Next time you log in the system, that field's gone. You don't have to use it. Now, obviously, if it's a required field, you can't do that. But any field that's flexible, you can do that. Here's just where you put the detailed description. I'm not going to put anything here, but I've seen there's paragraphs that you could put in this. You put all the information you want in there, and the vendor will go in there and read it and have it for them. So we're using that field quite a bit. Here's where the reference system appears, and obviously you can see it, one already populated, and that's the North America reference system. If I was in Europe, I could change that to the Europe one. It's always going to populate for me. Or if I'm working both systems, I can hit the drop down here, and I can choose which system I want. Now here's the material field, and this material field is actually connected now based on the reference system I put in, connected to the ERP system. So I'm just going to put in the part number because I know the part, but if I needed to search for it, the same logic would occur. I'd hit on it, I'd have a search field, I would find my part, select it.
So even though QIM is a separate system, it is validating all that data and leveraging all that data back in your ECC system. And it's very transparent to the user, which is quite nice.
Yep. And then what type of issue this? And this is a lot of these are custom Tenneco fields that we put in place. So what type of issue? We want to know right up front, is this a quality or a delivery issue? So we choose quality. Next, you can move into the defect area. So Tenneco had a standard globalized defect process or code process where it was connected with QIM or with QM. So you would actually say, okay, you would go find the defect number, select it, and then from that defect number, you'd have subcodes that you could choose to say, what type of specific defect is it. So to give you an example here, I'm going to hit Add Defect. And I'm going to say, okay, what's my defect code? I'm going to hit the search button.
Can you get this on HANA, Omer? Yeah, question? Yeah, so one of the reasons Tenneco bought QIM was to first address the supplier complaints, but in the global project that we have going on, we are using quality notifications for internal problems, customer complaints, both OE and aftermarket. There is a plan to move to this. And SAP is actually going to basically be delivering the 8D process in QIM 2.0, which will be out sometime next year. So there is a plan, if this is successful, and it has been thus far, we learn more, to potentially leverage this for other processes, yes.
Yep. And there's also a connection to the ERP system. If you want to look at, if you got quality for notifications already created, you can actually, in your work list, you can link that in there. So when you go in your work list, you can see, well, show me all the quality notifications that are in the ERP system. You can click on it, it's going to bring you right into the system, and you can view it through there too. So here I'm just going to select, well, it's a dimension issue, and now I'm going to go to my defect code. And based on that group I selected, I have a certain subset of dimension codes I can choose from. If I would have chose a different group, I'd have different selections here. So I'll just use the first one here.
So time-wise, let's kind of run through some of the cool stuff too.
What's that?
But we're kind of getting short on time.
Oh,
so
okay.
Let's run through the partners real quick, and then
Yep.
The reference objects, partners, and activities, and show them the BRF Plus piece real quick.
Sure. So once you input your information at the issue level, then you can say, okay, well, where is the issue actually happening in the ERP system? What's my purchase order and delivery document? What's all the reference objects? So I would click on here and say, well, I'm going to find, I know that this is on a purchase order. And if I know my purchase order, it's easy. I just put in the number. If I don't, I can search for it and say, okay, which one is it? New ones will always scroll up to the top, so it's usually one of the more recent ones. Once I select that, all the information pertaining to that appears. So I've got my plant, I got my order number, I've got my material, I've got my vendor, we use vendor partner functions, so we've got the order from address, the invoicing party, all connected to there, so you can see all that. And then here's where I would say, okay, let me see if there's any duplicates out there. And it says no duplicates exist within the last 60 days. So, okay, I'm good.
One of the cool things here, too, is when it brings in all these reference objects, it's truly referencing that data. So if you want to know more in your ECC system, you can click on any of those hyperlinks, and it'll launch you right into web GUI of the ECC system. So it makes it very transparent to the user. Just like quality notifications, you can double-click and see that data. Here, we can just hyperlink into it as well. Jump link functionality that they provide. Yep.
So now I'm going to go to the Define Partners section. And you can see right away you get a message saying the business partner could not be automatically assigned. So for some reason, the business partner isn't tied to that vendor number. So that's a point that say, oh, I'm going to go investigate, or I know it's in there, it's just there's some master data issue, I'm going to go find it myself. So next I'm going to click on here, and you're going to see that some of this business partner information, and again, this is a test system, but it automatically populated for me. My debit memo approver, my plant manager, the person that's creating the MRR automatically populates for you, so myself. And then you actually find, okay, well, who's the buyer? And you can hit the drop down and search by name, area. There's a bunch of different combinations you can do. Just to save time, I'm just going to put in a dummy number here. And then this is where the vendor business partner would be defined if it automatically is found. If not, same thing, I would search for it, find it. Oops, I did 102. We also have a check to look at our business partners, because the way we structure our business partners is we have a manufacturing business partner, and then we create contacts for that vendor. So we actually want to find the contact person. The contact person is the one that's actually going to be dealing with it. We don't care about the manufacturing location as a whole. So it will check to make sure you're actually choosing a person, not the actual manufacturing company. And then I'll choose what's the priority. Is this a green issue? Is this a yellow issue, a red issue? All this drives is the different type of workflows. If I choose a red one, a lot more people are going to get emails versus if I choose a green one. And then next, this is where kind of the core process happens. I'm going to have to answer some questions off the bat. Is this a quality or delivery issue? So if I know what the selection is, I can just select it, or I can hit the drop down here and say, okay, quality. And then once I select that activity and I say, okay, I'm complete with answering this question, I'll complete it. It'll kick off the next questions for me. So now basically, okay, it's quality. Well, you're going to have a containment plan. Are you going to have a corrective action plan? And it's the same process.
So the system's dynamically determining the workflow and the process flow through the organization based upon his answers. This is one huge, huge, huge improvement over quality notification functionality, because before we had tasks and activities, and we still have tasks, and these are all called activities, but we can basically display information to the user, we can ask them a question, we can have short-term preventative actions and long-term preventative actions. So a lot of different things, and it's just dynamically going to build. And kind of James went through it earlier, but we got challenged by our project manager that if they've gone through the work to assign the partners on the issue level, why wouldn't they default to the activity level? So why would they have to choose those again? So we have an enhancement in place that brings all that data through, which is quite nice. It really does make the application very user-friendly.
Exactly. And each activity has its own tab, so you can actually submit containment plan to the vendor. This is a vendor action. You can say vendor corrective action, and this vendor needs to do it. He would actually come into that activity, and he could put information as to the containment plan. He could go through and say, okay, I'm going to attach a containment plan into there, and you can actually upload it into there. So it's very flexible, very user-friendly. And then we have our same process with our debit memo. We say, is the debit memo needed, yes or no? And then it kicks off that approval process I was talking about earlier.
So in the interest of time, I think now if you have any questions or not, we're around all day. We can show you more about this. Yes, sir.
Out of curiosity, what was the deployment time it took to get this up and running? You mentioned the project started 1.5
Right.
Just curious, actually, once you chose to go with QIM, how long did it take?
Can you repeat it? So
Right. So the question is how long did it actually take us to deploy the QIM solution? So I had mentioned earlier we started a year and a half ago. We really kicked the project off. When did we kick the
December, I would say November.
November, December
December
timeframe.
timeframe.
And our first go live was originally scheduled for May. We went live June 3rd. So it was about a 6-month deployment plan. It is a new product, and we were learning a lot. And we've taken a lot farther than the standard. So, but it's, if you're looking to use QIM, there is definitely going to be a little bit longer of a lead time, especially if you want to enhance the solution a bit. So about 6 months, though.
Yep.
Quick question, can you attach photos or documents or link to documents?
Yeah, straight standard out of the box, you can, as long as you configure it, you can attach any attachment at the issue level as well as the activity level.
Yep.
Okay, so one of the nice things that they did is this cost section and stuff, this cost reference matrix, we wanted to basically make that dynamic, and for time's sake, we ended up on the front page, we put a link to a document. You know, we could configure that so you could link and go get the document. So they'd go get the form, they would fill out the form, and then they would actually attach that Excel form to the activity. So multiple ways to do it, but yeah, straight out of the box.
Yep.
Sir?
Are you using global batch traceability at all as a solution? And how does this integrate with that?
It doesn't. So global batch traceability, for those of you, the question is, are we using global batch traceability? Really a nice new tool, was launched at the same time as this. Very visual, allows you to go explode forward, backwards, et cetera. Tenneco really doesn't batch manage anything. Their process is being a discrete manufacturer, production parts, et cetera. They have some traceability requirements from a quality perspective, but it's very challenging in a repetitive type process to get that implemented. So they're really not using batch management at all. Any other questions?
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I could.
So you went live earlier this month, and you talked earlier about some of the intended benefits. What's the time frame that you expect to see at least the initial benefits you're projecting?
So we've actually already seen those benefits. One of the benefits that we saw is not needing to train the users. We saw that immediately during business acceptance testing. We had global people testing the system, and some people centrally in Monroe, but the system was easy to use. The system was validating the data and stuff for them. It was able to connect to one thing, so they're already realizing those benefits. Now, being fair from an implementation perspective, we went live with 2 sites in North America. There's plans right now to go live as a second pilot with 2 sites in Europe. Okay, and we're working through some of their concerns. And then we're going to go big bang in North America, which will be how many sites, James? 15?
15, 20.
Yeah, 15, 20 sites. So, but we're seeing that. I mean, it was very easy to use and stuff. And that was some of the comments that initially came out of business acceptance tests was hey, you know, this is a product that is going to make sense and it's going to work for our workforce. Very little training, very little lead time to get them up and running, which is nice. In fact, with North America, we were only planning on 1 site. After they saw that, there was another site in Napoleon that said, hey, we'd love to go live with you. So we had 2 sites initially. So,
just repeat it.
oh, what about the parts per million type metric? So on the second tab, there's basically different fields that we capture, the 3 different types of quantities that are used in those parts per million. They're then exported out of QIM through one of the work lists that James talked about. So the work lists are just like the ALV grids. You can customize the way they look. You can bring in those fields, and then you can dump it to Excel. It's currently being done elsewhere. Long term, when we get everybody up on here, we're going to define, will it be done, those calculations be done in QIM, or will we still take that out to a Cognos? So good question. So thank you for your time today, James. Thank you for showing off the solution.
No problem. Thank you.